Question number 2. If you take away the words in bold, does the sentence still make sense? Number 1, if we say, Enki is the kind of teacher, does it have the same meaning? Does it have sense? For example, if we erase this part of the sentence, does it have sense?
No.
No, it doesn't, right? What about the next one? If we erase this part of the sentence, does the sentence have sense? Many areas of the world receive very little rainfall.
Yes.
Yes, it has sense. Very good. So I want you to tell me what kind of thing, or what is this, who doesn't accept errors and which makes growing trees a real challenge. How do you call this? These words in bold. Any ideas? Do you remember how do we call this?
Relative clauses.
Okay, relative clauses. What is a clause? What is a clause? Any ideas of what is a clause?
A rule?
A rule? Maybe.
Like this, like a rule.
Like a rule? Okay. Anybody else?
Some words that has a subject, a verb.
Again, please.
It's a sentence has a subject and a verb.
It's a sentence that have a subject and a verb. That has a subject and a verb. There is a difference between a sentence and a clause, but yes, you are right. A clause is a group of words that contains a subject and a verb. Okay, this is a clause. A group of words containing a subject and a verb. And this can be a sentence or part of a sentence. Okay, so we're going to check the difference between a clause and a sentence, because in a normal sentence, we also have a subject and a verb, right? So some people can confuse them. Here we have a sentence. I can't cook very well, but I make quite good pancakes. So this is a sentence. How many clauses do you think we have here in this sentence?
Two clauses.
Two clauses. What is the first clause?
I can cook very well.
I can't cook very well, right? This is the first clause. And what about the second clause?
I make quite good pancakes.
Very good. How do you recognize that these two are clauses?
Because
A
as a
preposition.
subject and a verb.
Yes, because they have both have subjects and verbs, right? Can cook and make. Very good. As you can see, in one sentence, we can have one clause or more clauses. We can have 2, 3 clauses according to the sentence. Okay, so that is the only difference between a clause and a sentence. So a clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. And in a sentence, we can have more or more than one clause. Sorry, one or more than one clause. Okay? So now we are going to check this. What is a relative clause? You told me this is a relative clause in the exercise, right? The ones that we have here. What is a relative clause? Now that you know what is a clause, what do you think is a relative clause? Any ideas? A relative clause?
Who and which?
These are not clauses. Remember that a clause is a group of words, not only a word.
There could be another sentence that is according to the first or sentence, or is continuing the idea.
Could be. Any other ideas?
A sentence with isn't or is not complete or not makes sense without an extra information.
Not exactly. No. Okay, we're going to check what is a relative clause. So now you know what is a clause, right? It's a group of words with a subject and a verb. A relative clause is a clause that starts with a relative pronoun. A relative clause is a clause that starts with a relative pronoun. Okay, do you remember any relative pronouns? The ones that you have in the book, in the examples. What are the relative pronouns here?
Who and which.
Which?
Who and which. Very good. So these are relative pronouns, right? So here we have some examples of relative pronouns. Who, which, that, whose, where, when, whom, why. These are some of the relative pronouns we can find in sentences, okay? So for example, the woman who called you is my dentist. So as you can see, who called you is my relative clause, okay? So let's continue with this topic. So we talk about some relative pronouns. We are going to remember when to use these relative pronouns, okay? So here we have who, then we have that, and which, okay? Do you remember when to use who? When do we
When we are
Person.
referring to a person.
Yes, when we are referring to a person or to people, right? Very good. For example, the woman who lives next door is a doctor. Or we can say people who study languages are smart. Something that you need to take into consideration when you are talking, when you are using these relative clauses with people or a person is the verb. As you can see, if we talk about a third person in the singular form, we need to use the verb for the third person singular in the present simple, if the sentence is in the present simple, right? But if we talk about people, the verb is in the base form, okay? What about that? When do we use that? That?
About object.
When we talk about
Animals.
animals,
Object.
animal and objects. Okay, yes. We can use that to talk about objects, okay? For example, John bought a TV that is bigger than mine. Okay, what are we referring to when we say that?
TV.
TV.
To the TV, right, very good. But also, we can use that to replace who. Remember? We can use that to talk about a person too, or people. For example, the woman that lives next door is a doctor. So we can use exactly the same sentence and use that to replace who. Okay, so that is used to talk about objects or to talk about people. Okay, what about which? What do you think?
Only objects. Or
Objects.
things.
Yes, things, objects, places, animals, right? Something that is not people. Very good. We can say, John bought a TV which is bigger than mine. So we can use which to replace that when we are talking about things, okay, that are not people. And we can use it for plural too. Michael's sneakers which are really expensive are lost. So we are talking about the sneakers, right? Something that changes is just the verb when we are talking in singular and in plural. Okay? Any questions about this? I guess this is something to remember, right? Because you know this. Let's talk about other relative pronouns. Whose. We use whose to indicate possession, and we normally use whose with a noun before a noun. Okay, for example, whose phone is this? As you can see, we use a noun here. And this is the girl's. This is the girl whose phone was lost. Whose phone was lost. Entonces, esto es para indicar posesión. ¿De quién era el teléfono? De la chica. Okay. And then we have where to talk about places. She came back to the place where she left her phone. Okay, so we're going to use some of these relative pronouns, especially which and that, and the ones that are related to objects. We can use also whose. Okay. Any questions until here?
Teacher, about whom?
Whom?
Yes.
Whom
When we
is a,
use whom.
okay, it's a relative pronoun too, but enseguida lo voy a explicar eso, but it's the object of the sentence, it's not the subject. Who is the subject of the sentence and whom is the object. We can use it as the object of the sentence, okay? Then we're going to check a little bit about the subject and the object, okay? So let's continue. So when do you think we need to use relative clauses? When do we use them? You said something before about the use of relative clauses. When do we use relative clauses?
When the sentence is not complete or not makes sense without the extra information.
Okay, could be. You have some parts correct. Yes, okay. We use relative clauses when we want to join two English sentences or when we want to give more information about something. So these are the two situations in which we can use relative clauses, okay? To join two sentences or more, maybe, and to give more information about something, okay? Let's see here some examples. Here we have, I bought a new car. It is very fast. As you can see, here I have two sentences, and I want you to join these two sentences with a relative clause. What can you say?
I bought a new car, which is very fast.
Very good. I bought a new car, which is very fast, or that is very fast. Any of them is the same, right? As you can see, we are joining these two sentences in only one. Here we have another one. She has a son. He's a doctor. So I want to give more information about her son. What can I say in one sentence?
She has a son who is a doctor.
Very good. She has a son who is a doctor. So if you can see, we can join the sentences and we can give extra information about something, okay? And of course, we use relative clauses and relative pronouns to do this. So here we have some relative pronouns, and I want you to help me to complete the sentences here using the relative pronouns here, okay? Number one, I'm looking for a secretary can use a computer well. What can we say?
Who?
Or that.
Who we are talking about?
A secretary.
Secretary.
Secretary. Very
A
good. Is
first.
there any other option?
That.
That. Yes, we can use that too because we are talking about a person, a secretary, right? Number 2, my birthday was my 40th, turned out to be a wonderful day.
Which?
Okay, why? We are talking about
Birthday.
the birthday, right? Something that is not a person. And we can have another option, and this is
That.
that. We can use that too. The next one, the Javan tiger habitat was largely destroyed by humans. It's now extinct.
Where?
Who
Whose?
that?
Which? Or
Which?
Which or that. No.
Was
Whose, como si fuera una JU. ¿Por qué whose?
because we're talking about that habitat.
We are talking about the habitat that belongs to the Javan tiger, right? Okay, so remember, when we use whose, we have a noun after the relative pronoun. Okay, we have a noun. Then we have the next one. I sometimes go and study in my local park. I can
Where?
get some fresh air.
Where?
Where?
And we are talking
Where?
about
A local.
place.
A place.
the local park. Okay,
A place.
number 5. The doctor
Who?
Who?
okay, because we are talking about the doctor,
The
right?
person.
That is a person. And we can say also that because we can replace who for that. I was hoping to see wasn't on duty. Okay, so these are some of the relative clauses we can have and how can we use the relative pronouns, okay? Any questions about this? Okay, let's go to the next part. We are going to talk about 2 different relative clauses there are, okay? So we have defining relative clauses and we have non-defining relative clauses. Do you have any ideas about what is the difference between these 2? Do you remember anything about this kind of relative clauses? Defining and non-defining? No?
Teacher,
Yes?
could we, the first one is to give sense to the sentence, and the
Mhm.
second one is to add another information, extra information.
Very good, yes. We use defining relative clauses to specify which person, thing, or place we are talking about. Okay? And non-defining relative clauses to give extra information about the person, thing, or place we mentioned in the main clause. So when we use non-defining relative clauses, it's extra information. When we use defining relative clauses, is important or essential information. Okay? This is the difference between these 2. Let's check an example here. People who hate chocolate are uncommon. Okay, as you can see, I am specifying what kind of people I'm talking about. I am talking about people who hate chocolate. Okay, and here we have another. The dish I ordered, which was delicious, was a traditional plate from Russia. Now, you can see in this sentence, the information I am giving in the relative clause is optional, is extra. So we can erase this sentence. We can say, the dish I ordered was a traditional plate from Russia. And the sentence has sense. We don't need this relative clause. Okay? It's completely perfect. We can understand this sentence. So that's why we say that these non-defining clauses are for extra information. Okay? But in this situation, if we erase this, who hate chocolate, the sentence is a little bit incomplete. People are uncommon. What people? What people you are talking about? Right? So this is the difference between these two kind of relative clauses. Do you notice any other difference?
The comma.
The commas, yes, the commas. So when we use non-defining relative clauses, we give extra information and we use commas to separate this information from the main sentence, sorry, from the main clause. Okay, so we need to separate this with commas. This non-defining relative clause can go in the middle of the sentence, as in the example here, or it can go at the end. We can say, the dish I ordered was a traditional plate from Russia, which was delicious. Okay, so we can use this in any of these forms. Another difference between these two clauses is that sometimes, in some situations, we can omit the relative pronoun in defining relative clauses. Okay, we can omit the relative pronoun. And another difference is that in non-defining relative clauses, we can't use that. Okay, this is another difference between these two kind of clauses. Let's continue. Here we have some sentences. It says, an elephant is an animal that lives in hot countries. Jack, who's retired now, spends a lot of time with his grandchildren. They live in a house whose roof is full of holes. We want to use the new Tom Carter film, which was released on Friday. My sister, whose dog I'm looking after, is visiting a friend in Australia. Children who hate chocolate are uncommon. Let's go to a country where the sun always shines. So, I want you to tell me in the first sentence, which is the relative clause in the first sentence?
Is a
That
defining.
lives.
Again, please. Which is the relative clause? What part of the sentence is the relative clause?
My
That lives.
sister, who's an elephant, is an animal.
Okay, please, can you raise your hand so I can hear you well, because I can't. Anybody? Can you tell me which is the relative clause in this sentence, in the first one?
That live in hot countries.
That lives in hot countries. Very good. This is the relative clause. Okay. Now, what about the second sentence? What is the relative clause in the second one?
It spends a lot of time.
Okay. Why do you think this is a relative clause?
Who is
Gustavo?
retired now?
Gustavo?
Who's retired now?
Gustavo?
Because have the complement, the verb, but no, it's not correct. It who's retired because it's the meaning of the sentence. It's a part.
I couldn't understand. So which is the relative clause, Gustavo?
I think it spends a lot of time
Why?
because have the verb and the, what is a lot? I could remember.
Quantifier. It's a quantifier.
A lot of time with his grandchildren.
Dígame, Gustavo, ¿cómo empezamos una relative clause? ¿Cómo empieza? ¿Con qué la empezamos?
With the,
Fíjese en la primera. ¿Con qué empieza esta relative clause?
with that.
That. ¿Qué es that?
Is a, I could
You are-
remember the name.
You are lost. Anybody?
A relative pronoun.
Yes, it's a relative pronoun. So tell me, guys, in number 2, which is the relative clause in number 2?
Who's retired now?
Who's retired now? Thank you. Number 3, what is the relative clause here?
Whose
Whose
roof
roof is full of holes.
Yes, whose roof is full of holes. The next one.
Which was released
Was released on Friday.
Which was released on Friday. The next one.
whose dog I'm
Whose
looking
dog
after.
I'm looking after.
Whose dog I'm looking after. Very good. The next one.
Who hate
Who
chocolate.
hate chocolate? I
Who
can
hates
come on.
chocolate. And the last one.
Where the
Where the
sun
sun
always
always
shines.
Okay. Tell me, Gustavo, now that you have all the relative clauses here, how do we start a relative clause?
With a relative complement.
No.
No. What was? Sorry.
With a relative
who?
pronoun.
Pronouns. Yeah,
Yes,
pronouns.
that, who, whose, which, whose, who, or where, right? Very good. Thank you. So now I want you to tell me what kind of clause, what kind of relative clause do we have in the first sentence? Guys,
Defining.
defining. How do you know that?
Because without that sentences, it doesn't have sense.
Without that clause, the sentence doesn't have sense. Very good. What about the second?
Is
Undefined.
non-defining
Non-defining. How do you know that?
because it's an extra information and it's separated with commas.
Very good. It's extra information and it's separated by commas. The next one. What about the next one?
Is defining.
Defining. Yes, defining relative clause. What about the next one, Adrian?
What, teacher?
What about the next sentence? What kind of clause do we have in the next sentence? Another lost student. Emmanuel, tell me please.
Defining,
Why?
because it's necessary to understand.
Okay. We want to see the new Tom Carter film. Is this sentence complete?
Oh, yes,
So,
it's not defining.
non-defining.
Because it doesn't necessary to
It's
order.
extra information, right? And we have a comma. Remember that when we have a comma, it's non-defining, right? Thank you. Let's go to Cynthia. What about you? The next one. What kind of clause do we have here?
No defining,
Why?
but the commas.
Okay, we have the commas and also because it's extra information. We don't need this information, right? To have sense or to make the sentence a complete idea, we can say my sister is visiting a friend in Australia. And it has sense, right? What about the next one, Rocio?
Is defining, teacher.
Why?
Because if we erase the relative clauses, it doesn't have a sense.
Very good. And the last one, please, Luciana.
It's defining.
Why?
Because we don't need an extra information.
We what?
We don't need extra information.
No, because if we erase this part of the sentence doesn't have sense, right? Okay, very good. So, we are going to talk about relative pronouns in defining relative clauses, okay? So, we have two kinds of relative pronouns in defining relative clauses, okay? One that is the subject of the clause, and the other one that is the object of the clause. Do you remember what is the subject? How can you define subject of the sentence or subject of the clause? What is this? What is a subject? Remember that? Yes?
The person or an object and who is talking in the sentence.
Okay. Anybody else? Remember that we always say subject, verb, and complement, or subject, verb, and object when we are formulating our sentences. What is a subject? What do you understand for the subject? Something that you can add to what your partner said? No? Okay.
Is the pronoun?
No, not always. The subject is the person, thing, or place we talk in the sentence. Yes, we talk about this in the sentence, but also is who performs the action in the sentence. Who does the action is the doer of the action in the sentence or in the clause in this situation. What about the object? What is the object of a sentence? And don't tell me that is a thing, please. What is the object of the sentence?
The action that describes it's the action that the subject do or
okay, but the action that the subject does is the verb, right?
The situation, teacher?
Teacher,
yes.
It's the person or place that receive the action.
Very good. It's the receiver of the action, right? Could be a person, a thing, an animal, a place. The is who or that receives the action. Who or what receives the action, okay? Very good. So now that we have these two concepts, we are going to learn about this in relative clauses, okay? When the relative pronoun is the subject of the clause, it is required. So it means that we need the relative pronoun. But when the relative pronoun is the object of the sentence, it's optional. Okay, so we can erase it and the sentence is correct. Let's check the same examples we had before. People who hate chocolate are uncommon. In this sentence, who is our relative pronoun and who is the subject of the clause? Okay, because who The people who are the ones who are performing the action, right? They hate chocolate. And in the other sentence, the dish I ordered was delicious. Which is the subject in this sentence? ¿Quién sería el sujeto en esta oración?
The dish.
The dish. The dish realiza la acción.
No.
I sería.
I, because I order. ¿Ok? Y si se dan cuenta de dish, ¿qué ordeno yo? El plato, la comida. Entonces, the dish es el objeto de nuestra oración o de nuestra clause porque recibe nuestra acción. Entonces, en esta oración, that se refiere al objeto de nuestra oración o de nuestra clause. ¿Ok? Entonces, podemos omitirlo. We can omit it. We can say, the dish I ordered was delicious. And it is correct. Okay? Something that we can see, or something that we, how can we realize that is if the relative pronoun is the subject or the object, is the word that follows this relative pronoun. For example, in the first one, what is the word that follows this relative pronoun?
A verb.
Verb. Very good. And here?
Subject.
A subject and a verb, right? So that's the difference. It says you can usually tell when a relative pronoun is the object of the clause because it's followed by another subject and a verb. ¿Ok? Entonces siempre cuando tengan un relative pronoun que está seguido por un sujeto y un verbo, significa que es el objeto de nuestra clase. Y si está seguido por un verbo, significa que es el sujeto. ¿Ok? So,